Karen spun around, flashlight beam catching Jim Henderson's grim expression. Behind him stood Sandra and their 18-year-old daughter Madison, all holding their phones. "Say cheese, Karen," Madison said, camera flash illuminating Karen's mortified face. "This is going straight to the police and the HOA board." Karen's mind raced. Being caught trespassing would destroy her credibility and likely cost her the committee chairmanship. Everything she built, everything she was, would crumble. "I was investigating potential violations," she said, trying to summon her authoritative tone, but her voice cracked with desperation. "You were breaking and entering," Jim replied coldly. "Just like you've been breaking every boundary of decent neighbor behavior for months." Sandra stepped closer, and Karen saw something she'd never noticed before: genuine hurt in the woman's eyes, not just anger. "Do you know what you've cost us, Karen? The stress fines, the legal fees to fight your violations, the way our daughter can't have friends over without wondering if you'll call the police. Do you know what you've done to our family?" Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. In her crusade for order and justice, she'd somehow become the villain, but she couldn't admit that. Admitting it would mean facing the yawning emptiness that the HOA rules have been covering up. "Rules exist for a reason," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Madison, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Mrs. Whitmore, my graduation party wasn't even that loud. Most of the mess was from earlier in the day when we were setting up. We were going to clean your pool the next morning, but you left that violation notice before we even woke up." The words hit Karen like physical blows. She'd been so ready for war that she'd never considered whether one was actually necessary. You should have asked permission," she managed weakly. "Permission for what? To live in our own house?" Sandra's voice was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. "Karen, when was the last time you had people over? When was the last time you did something just for fun?" Karen couldn't answer because she couldn't remember. Since the divorce, her entire existence had narrowed to HOA meetings, violation reports, and the pursuit of perfect order in an increasingly chaotic world. "I'm calling the police," Jim said, thumb hovering over his phone screen. "Unless you're ready to have a real conversation about ending this insanity." Karen looked around the Henderson backyard, at the deck she'd been measuring, the garden she'd been photographing, the life she'd been systematically trying to destroy. For the first time in months, she saw not violations and infractions, but evidence of a family that actually enjoyed living together. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "We want our lives back," Sandra replied. "We want to barbecue without wondering if you'll measure our smoke output. We want our daughter to feel comfortable in her own home. We want to stop being afraid of our neighbor." Karen realized with stunning clarity that she'd become exactly what she'd always feared: the thing that brought chaos and misery into other people's ordered lives. "And in return," she whispered, "in return, we won't press charges for tonight," Jim said, "and we won't share these photos with the HOA board. But you have to stop, Karen. All of it. The surveillance, the violation notices, the war." Karen nodded slowly, feeling something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since Robert left, since she'd decided that controlling her environment was safer than risking genuine connection with other people. Threat, and more like a possibility. 3 days later, Karen discovered her prized rose garden had been systematically destroyed. Every bloom had been clipped at the stem, leaving behind a graveyard of headless stalks. The roses had taken her 4 years to cultivate, her therapy after the divorce, her one remaining source of genuine joy. She knelt among the ruins, silk blouse catching on thorns as she gathered evidence. The cuts were clean, deliberate. This wasn't random vandalism. This was targeted retaliation. "Those bastards," she whispered, surprising herself with the profanity. Karen Whitmore never swore, but apparently Karen Whitmore had never had her roses murdered before. Her hands shook as she photographed the damage, but not from fear, from pure, crystalline rage. The Hendersons had crossed a line she didn't even know existed. The HOA emergency meeting, convened that evening in the community center, Karen had called all 7 board members, plus 3 residents who'd expressed concerns about recent neighborhood disruptions. She needed witnesses for what came next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, clicking through her meticulously prepared presentation. We're facing an unprecedented challenge to community standards and personal safety. The photos were damning. The trashed Henderson lawn, the pool debris, screenshots of the threatening text, and finally, the destroyed roses. Several board members gasped at the garden photos. Motion to implement immediate enforcement protocol against the Henderson family, Karen announced, including daily property inspections, noise monitoring equipment, and a formal hearing regarding potential HOA membership termination. Board member Patricia Chen shifted uncomfortably. Karen, don't you think termination is extreme? They're good neighbors generally. Good neighbors don't threaten and vandalize. Karen cut her off. Good neighbors respect community standards. The motion passed 5-2. Karen left the meeting energized for the first time in weeks. She had official backing now, and the tools to make the Hendersons understand exactly what they'd started. The next morning, she began her surveillance. From her upstairs office window, she had a perfect view of the Henderson property. She documented every violation. Newspapers left on the driveway past the 8 a.m. pickup requirement, lawn sprinklers running during restricted hours, their teenagers' basketball disturbing the peace. Each infraction went into her expanding file. By day 3 of her monitoring, Karen noticed she was being watched back. Jim Henderson stood in his driveway each morning, coffee in hand, staring directly at her window. The message was clear: two could play this game. The psychological warfare escalated quickly. Karen filed noise complaints every time she heard the Henderson dog bark. The Hendersons responded by having their lawn service arrive at exactly 7 a.m., the earliest allowable time under HOA regulations. Karen installed motion-activated floodlights aimed at the property line. The Hendersons planted 8-foot privacy hedges that technically violated the landscaping height restrictions. More violation notices flew back and forth. The fines accumulated. Karen felt grimly satisfied watching the Hendersons mounting frustration, even as her own stress levels reached dangerous heights. She'd started taking sleeping pills and skipping meals, sustained purely by righteous indignation and black coffee. 2 weeks into the war, Karen's sister Diane visited unexpectedly. "Jesus, Karen, you look terrible," Diane said, taking in Karen's hollow cheeks and the obsessive wall of Henderson documentation that had taken over the living room. Karen Whitmore stood in her manicured backyard at 6:47 a.m., coffee mug trembling in her grip as she stared at the floating debris contaminating her pristine pool. Pizza boxes, beer cans, and what appeared to be someone's designer sandal bobbed mockingly in the chlorinated water that had cost her $3,000 to maintain the season. "This is war," she whispered, then louder. "This is absolutely war." The source was obvious. The Hendersons next door had thrown another one of their casual gatherings last night, the 3rd this month. Their teenage son's friends had clearly used her pool as their personal garbage dump, probably thinking it was hilarious to ruin the HOA Compliance Committee chairwoman's perfect backyard. Karen marched to her home office, still in her silk pajamas, and began typing furiously on her laptop. If the Hendersons wanted to play games, she'd show them exactly who they were dealing with. The Willows Creek Homeowners Association had rules for a reason, and she'd been enforcing them meticulously for the past 3 years. HTC 2847. RECIPIENT. Henderson Family. 1247 Maple Drive. Violation. Noise Ordinance. 10.3. Property damage. 15.7. Trespassing. 22.1. Fine. $850. DADLINE. AFORCOMPLIANC. 48 HOURS. She printed 12 copies. One for the Hendersons, one for each board member, and extras for her files. Organization was everything in HOA management. By 7 a.m., Karen was dressed in her navy blazer and matching skirt, looking every inch the professional administrator she'd become since her divorce 2 years ago. The HOA position gave her purpose, respect, and most importantly, control over her environment. She wouldn't let some inconsiderate neighbors destroy the order she'd worked so hard to build. The Henderson house looked like a crime scene. Red Solo cups littered their front lawn, and tire marks scarred their pristine driveway. Karen photographed everything with her phone, documenting each violation with the precision of a forensic investigator. She rang the doorbell repeatedly until Jim Henderson answered, looking haggard in his wrinkled polo shirt. "Karen, it's 7 in the morning. Your party last night violated multiple HOA regulations," she interrupted, thrusting the violation notice toward him. "Your guests dumped trash in my pool and disturbed the entire neighborhood until 2 a.m. Jim rubbed his temples. "Look, if there's damage to your pool, we'll pay for the cleaning. This isn't about money, Jim. It's about respect for community standards." Karen's voice carried the authority she'd perfected during countless board meetings. "You have 48 hours to address these violations or face additional penalties." Additional penalties? Jim's wife Sandra appeared behind him, her expression hardening. "Karen, our daughter just graduated high school. We threw her a party. Kids made some noise. That's life. Life has rules." Karen replied coolly, "Rules that everyone agreed to when they purchased property in Willows Creek. I didn't write these regulations. I simply enforced them." Sandra stepped forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You know what, Karen? Ever since your divorce, you've turned into a miserable busybody who can't stand seeing other people happy. Get a life." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Her composed facade cracked for just a moment before reforming into something harder, colder. "Personal attacks won't change the facts," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You have 48 hours. As she walked back across the perfectly edged lawn line between their properties, Karen felt the familiar burn of isolation in her chest. Sandra's words stung because they contained a grain of truth she wasn't ready to examine. But she pushed the feeling down, focusing instead on the righteous anger that fueled her mission. Back in her office, she began researching precedents for escalated enforcement actions. The Hendersons thought they could dismiss her, but they were about to learn that Karen Whitmore always got the last word. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, HOA lady, or you'll regret it." Karen stared at the message, her heart rate spiking. Threats were a new development, and they changed everything. She screenshot the text and added it to her growing file on the Henderson situation. Whatever happened next, she was ready for war. "I'm fighting for principle," Karen replied, not looking away from her computer screen where she was drafting another violation notice. "You're fighting with people who used to wave at you at the grocery store," Diane countered. "This isn't healthy. You're becoming exactly what Robert always said. Don't." Karen's voice went deadly quiet. "Don't mention him." Diane sighed. "He said you couldn't let anything go, that you had to control every little detail because you were terrified of chaos. Look around, Karen. You're creating chaos." After Diane left, Karen stood in her empty house, surrounded by her files and photos and violation notices. The silence felt oppressive, but she couldn't stop now. Stopping would mean admitting Sandra Henderson was right, that she'd become a miserable busybody with nothing better to do than police other people's lives. The breakthrough came when she discovered the Hendersons were planning to appeal her enforcement actions at the next general HOA meeting. They'd been quietly building support among other residents, painting Karen as an overzealous enforcer who'd lost perspective. Karen realized she needed something bigger, something undeniable that would vindicate her position once and for all. That's when she decided to investigate the Hendersons' property renovations from last spring. If she could prove they'd done unpermitted work, she could force them out of Willows Creek entirely. Late that night, she slipped into their backyard with a flashlight and measuring tape, looking for code violations. She was so focused on photographing their deck measurements that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "Well, well," Jim Henderson's voice cut through the darkness. "Guess who's trespassing now?" "I destroyed your roses," Madison said suddenly. "I was so angry about the party violations, and I saw you working in your garden every morning, and I wanted you to hurt like we were hurting." The confession should have reignited Karen's anger, but instead she felt oddly relieved. The mystery was solved, the circle complete. They were beautiful roses, Karen said quietly. You have good instincts for where to hit. Madison looked surprised by the response. I could help you replant them, if you want. Karen stared at the girl who destroyed her garden, offering to help rebuild it. The gesture felt impossibly generous, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had offered to help her with anything. I'd like that, she heard herself say. As she walked back to her house, Karen felt the weight of the violation files waiting in her office, the surveillance photos, the carefully documented evidence of her neighbor's humanity. Tomorrow, she would have to decide what to do with it all, whether to let go of the control that had been both her salvation and her prison. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The Henderson situation is just the beginning. Other families are talking. Be careful, Karen. She stared at the message, realizing that her war with the Hendersons might be ending, but her reckoning with Willows Creek was just beginning. Someone else was playing games now, and Karen had no idea who was pulling the strings. For the first time in months, uncertainty felt less like her